The culmination of his cricket writing came in 1963 with the publication of Beyond a Boundary, one of the most unusual books about sport ever written, treating cricket as artistic and dramatic spectacle, as well as putting it in the context of England, the Empire, and the anti-colonial struggle. But in fact, his first literary efforts took the form of fiction.
I'd written a short story. I used to write stories we used to publish. And in 1928, a volume appeared, The Best Short Stories of 1928. Every year, the volume used to appear with the best short stories of England, and there in the middle of it was my short story. Thereupon, a lot of information was conveyed to the Caribbean people. One, that James was a writer, and number two, to James, that he could write. The best short stories, such thing had never crossed my mind, but from that time, more or less, I was going to be a writer. I believe I'd had it in mind early. That is, I was about 7 years old. We were still living in Northwest, but that I can go by. And I wrote a story, and I showed it to my mother, about 10 pages in a copybook. And she said, that is the last of the Mohicans that we've been reading. You only take it from there and you put it in Trinidad. So I said, okay.
For his next book, James turned to politics. He wrote a short biography of the white Trinidadian labor leader, Captain Cipriani, one of the first to pose the question of Caribbean independence. This was later published as The Case for West Indian Self-Government in London in 1932. Is your decision to write the biography of Cipriani really your first political involvement?
Involvement, I think you are correct. But in all previous people who were talking about independence or putting up for elections against the establishment, I was in favor. All the young people who were literary or well-read were in favor generally. But involved, the actual writing about Cipriani was quite a step, because nobody had done anything like that before. And when it was heard that I was doing it, a lot of people told me, or wanted to know. I went around speaking and showed it to Cipriani. He said, by all means. It was a step not only for me, but for everybody, that Cipriani's biography should be written.
Now I want to ask you something about your formation at this stage, because on the one hand you've spoken a great deal about the importance of Queen's Royal College, a school in Trinidad very much modeled on a kind of English public school, and of the influence of teachers with an Oxford and Cambridge background, and the strong influence of English literature, etc. That's one model and a powerful formation for you. On the other hand is this growing involvement in the Caribbean and West Indian independence, etc. How do you reconcile these two forces at that stage of your life?
I didn't have to reconcile, because I got interested in the struggle for colonial independence. It wasn't so much Africa as India. Nehru and Gandhi became very important. And we talked about them and felt that the Caribbean, Trinidad, was a part of it too. And the Labour Party in Britain, which used to talk about independence and so forth. So in general, we had our feet pointed the correct way. We didn't do so much, but there we were. And then about 1929, 1930, the movement swelled, and I began to take part, because before that we were going to meetings, voting, and not doing much.
Your novel, Minty Alley, is not published until later, but it's written in this period.
It was written about 1928.
And it's very much about the life of ordinary Trinidadians.
Such as I knew it. My instinct is always to write about what I saw and what I knew. I had learned that from the study of European literature. So I, very well educated by them, knew that the proper way for me to write was to write about what I knew. And I had this great advantage. Nobody else had written. So I had a whole field open to myself. And when I began to write about it, the people said, okay, wonderful. So that I was being pushed along by a very helpful breeze. Yes.
It's at that time, in 32, that you take the decision to go to England.
I had felt before that ultimately I had to go to England because they were only publishing little pamphlets and so. To make a living as a writer, I had to go to England. And people told me, you're going to starve. Writers in England don't. But Larry Constantine told me, you come and you'll see how you get on. And what had happened when I went is quite a story.
Tell me what your first impressions of England in 1932 are.
I was in London for about 3 months, March till about May.
How many black people are in London at that time?
Not too many, a few. I tell you what struck me, I think I remember it, the familiarity between white women and black men. In London, they're quite at home, which is quite something for me, the Caribbean, you know. But my eyes were open and I realized that this was not some Trinidad expanded to Europe, but this was what really mattered. I tell you what surprised me somewhat, the East End, the poverty and the broken down houses and the cheap restaurants where you got a cup of tea and a piece of toast or stale cake. When I said, but that ain't too different from, yes. But nevertheless, you know, I am fairly level-headed. I realize the British Academy concerts and all that we didn't have that. And the picture gallery and the books and all that. Then I went to Paris. Tremendous. Paris impressed me more than London because of the books and the concentration of the Paris intellectual life. England was not like that.
After arriving in England in 1932, James set off for Nelson, Lancashire. There he lived with his old Trinidadian friend, Larry Constantine, the great cricketer, later to become the first Black Lord. James still played cricket, and more importantly, got a job writing about it for the Manchester Guardian as Neville Cardiss's deputy. He became an active member of the Independent Labour Party, the ILP. Most importantly, he made his first encounter with Marxism as a political theory.
And the editor of the Nelson newspaper was a man named Cartmel. And they all were very pleased that Larry Constantine, the cricketer, should have a person like CLR James writing for the Manchester Guardian. So I went to his office and he said, well, Mr. James, here are these books, and he gave me the history of the Russian Revolution by Leon Trotsky, Volume 1. And another book he gave me was The Decline of the West by Spengler. So I read both those books and immediately began to see the vast amount of history which I knew. So from there, I suddenly became a Marxist. I tell you a peculiar story. After a year or two, I had read all the Marxist books because it's easy enough. So I said, well, I was joined the Marxist movement. So I said, where are some Trotskys? Because I know that the communists are terrible liars. I've read the literature. So where are some Trotskys? They tell me down Hampstead. So I go down there. So I join, I sit down to join. There are one or two other people who come to join. And these are asking questions. and the official Trotskyists can't answer. So I, who have come to join, and one of the joiners, I have to take up the defense of Trotskyism against the critiques of those who want to join. So I join by defending critics. I become a very important person. In 2 shakes, I'm chairman of the Trotskyists. What?
You were persuaded by Trotsky's account of the Russian Revolution.
I was persuaded by that.
And by Trotsky's account of what had happened in the Soviet Union?
I read, but I must say, I read the Stalinist account. I bought the Stalinist books, I read them. Both of them were referring to Lenin. I bought the 12 volumes of Lenin, read them, referring to Marx, and I bought Capital Volume 1, the 18th movement of Louis Bonaparte. I read all of those, and then I said, no, I am a Marxist and I want to join the Trotskyists. But I had read them before so when I went in there, they didn't have to teach me anything. I had to teach them.
And there was one Trotskyist organization in that period?
There never is one Trotskyist organization. But there is one organization and there are 1 or 2 around. But it hadn't split up really then. Not only was the Trotskyist organization in Britain, it was international. We used to go to Paris and have conferences there, and I always went to the conference. And to be quite honest, I went because it was good to go to an international conference, but I thought the food was wonderful. So I always went to every conference. I had 3 or 4 days eating, because in England, oh God of mercy.
But you were also very active in Trotskyist politics in England in that period, because I know people who heard you speak
I was
a lot
the secretary of the British Trotskyist organization. Oh yes, I was very active. Not only was I very active, I was known as such. And people used to say, not only I was a Trotskyist, I'm just talking about history, that is the real Marxist in England. All that before the war. I had a real reputation in Britain because I didn't only know about Trotsky and Stalin, I had read the classics of Marxism and my memory, I understood them. So people would send for me to Bristol, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Nottingham, North Wales, South Wales, Swansea, all over the goddamn place. Come and talk. And they didn't want to hear so much about Trotskyism. They wanted somebody who would talk about Marxism, very much concerned about the theories of Marxism, and somebody who would expound it.